This is Catholic Forum. I'm Bob Krebs. Eduard Habsburg is Hungary's ambassador to the Holy See and the Sovereign Order of Malta. His family reigned in Austria, Hungary, Germany, Spain, and many other places for centuries. Also known as Archduke Eduard of Austria, he is a diplomat and social media personality. Eduard and his wife, Baroness Maria Theresa von Gudenus, have 6 children. Eduard is the author of several books, including children's books, novels, and screenplays. His latest book is titled Building a Wholesome Family in a Broken World, Habsburg Lessons from Centuries. Ambassador Habsburg, welcome back to Catholic Forum. We spoke a little over a year ago when your book at that time was The Habsburg Way, 7 Rules for Turbulent Times. Your new book is titled Building a Wholesome Family in a Broken World, Habsburg Lessons from the Centuries. And I want to thank you for taking time out of your busy schedule. I know you're in your office in Rome and a very, very busy time of year out there. So thanks for joining us today.
Thank you very much for having me on the show. And if you look over my shoulder, you can see the cover of my book.
Oh, absolutely. Very good. Very good. How convenient.
Yes.
So
just happens to be there.
Yeah.
Just happens to be there.
So why did you write this book now? And how would you say that the world is broken?
Well, there's 2 reasons why I wrote this book. The core reason is that I myself have made a beautiful experience in marriage and having children. We were blessed with 6 children, and I got really the strong conviction that a large, numerous family is good for the married couple, is good for the children, and is good for society. So if I write this, I write from the heart, and we are supposed to write what we know. And my last decades, actually, what I knew was this incredible experience of being married, having lots of children, and raising them. And then you look around and you see that this is not a normal experience for most people. And then I decided it might be a good idea to write a book about it. And the strongest push came when I gave a talk on Blessed Emperor Karl in Dallas, and 2 girls came up to me and said, "Where can we find a husband like Blessed Karl? Where can we find someone who's so good and so Catholic and so devout and all of that?" And so I begin with a chapter where you speak about how to find a good spouse.
Let's talk about that. A family starts with a husband and a wife. What are some tips to help people find that spouse that's correct for them?
Well, I would begin, and that's where your broken world comes in, that you asked about before. I would begin with observing how courtship and dating usually works nowadays. And that's really broken because it's not the way it worked over the last 2,000 or more years. So what happens nowadays is that people from very young age are being told that they have to get into intimate relationships, and then they stumble from one such relationship to the other, always getting together, breaking up again, getting together, breaking up again. And we are being told that this is important and good. And also that you should have fun while you're young, because being responsible comes later and all of that. So most people, even before they seriously begin about marriage, to think about marriage, they are already so deep in over their heads, doing things wrong. Because I believe that in order to have a long, lifelong, happy and fulfilling marriage, you have to begin totally different. But most people don't have that chance because nobody ever tells them. So I'm trying to do that with my book. So what I'm saying is you shouldn't stumble into a life of fun and dating, but you should think hard what you want for your entire life. You should, as I say, put all the money on red, make one big shot, and go for happiness for life. And you do that by picking the right spouse. And for the right spouse, I've got a so-called bucket list in my book of 5 criteria that you should use to find out whether the person you are interested in um, is a potential wife or husband for you, spouse. And I strongly advocate not to have a relationship with that person before you figure that out. Because having a relationship and getting far too close to each other before you're married will cloud your judgment. It will, as I say, pour sentimental sauce over your rational judgment. And what you want to do is look long, hard, and critically at the other person and check out whether the other person is really someone for life. So the first criterion that I give in my book, I wonder whether I should tell all of them. I want people to buy the book and find out for themselves.
Give us one or two.
What I say is that I've got 3 that are essential and 2 that are negotiable. The first essential, well, I'm a Habsburg, and if you read my first book, you will be able to tell me my first criteria, and that's your future spouse should share your faith, should, in the best of all cases, be Catholic, and if you haven't become Catholic by now, you should. Because I believe that the Catholic Church gives you the tools, the moral structure, and the practical helps for living a lifelong marriage. And I personally don't see any other institution, religion that would give you that, like the Catholic Church does. So that's one part. The other part is simply that if you can share with your future wife or husband, if you can share the faith, you have the most important thing in common. Looks can change, feelings can change. My mother always used to say that your feelings for your spouse sometimes depend on the amount of coffee you drank in the morning. And yes,
Your mother was very wise.
very wise. Men and women are different. They have different biologies, different biographies, different hurts, different joys, different interests, different experiences. So what you have in common is very little common ground. But if you have faith in common, you have the strongest basis that you can have in common for the next decades of your life. It will carry you through all difficult situations, and life throws really bad things at you, beautiful and bad things. And if you can both take each other's hands, sit in front of an image of Our Lady, a crucifix, with a rosary in the hand, and say, we'll give this to God now, you can get through everything. If you don't have that, I don't even know how you do it. So faith is on spot one in my. You really should try to shoot for a Catholic to be your spouse, and you will see when I go through the points that you might not automatically find your future spouse in the bar around the corner or walking to the local supermarket, because you are trying to find something really extraordinary and special. But there is more than you think that meet my criteria. Okay, the first is faith. The second, and this is a very important point, I call family, which means figure out in long talks with the other person whether you have the same idea about family. Idea about family, in my vision, is to have a large family, to be open for many children if God gives them to you. Can't guarantee that. To also be open for having children immediately. There's many people out there who want to get married and then have a single lifestyle for a few years before they decide to have children. It can also make sense economically. You can say, we first both have to earn money so we can afford children. I think that's the wrong approach. The right approach is if you are married and if God gives you the sacrament of marriage, then you should go for children, because that's what your relationship is about, being open for life. And you have to figure out whether you yourself and the other person is ready for a large family. Having a large family will be the greatest, most fulfilling, most wonderful experience that exists in the world, but it will come with a set of complications. You will probably have more difficulties to make ends meet. You might not be able to live downtown Manhattan if you have 7 children, but you might have to live somewhere at the edge of a small town in order to be able to afford housing. You might not be able to have that job that you want because you might need to take a job in an area that is good for a family with many children. All of this has to be clarified beforehand. See why I say that it's important not to live together and have a relationship and at some point in the future talk about this, but to talk about this before. So really clarify whether the other person is ready for this great, incredible, gigantic adventure of family that will have to take the first place in your life. Even more important than a nice car, if you can believe it.
Yeah, absolutely. My guest today on Catholic Forum is Ambassador Eduard Habsburg. His latest book, Building a Wholesome Family in a Broken World, Habsburg Lessons from the Centuries. Ambassador, you chose the word wholesome. And I thought that was kind of interesting. I mean, if you ask some people today what kind of family they would like, they might say, oh, I want a happy family, or I want a content family, maybe a safe family, or a Christian family. But you said wholesome. Why did you pick that word, and how would you define a wholesome family?
Well, first of all, you got me there because you're the first person to ever ask me that. I would say the reason why I picked wholesome is because if if people ask what kind of tweets, sorry, you call it posts now, does Ambassador Habsburg make? Most people will use the word wholesome. I think that I stand for a wholesome culture, which involves respectful, treating other people respectfully, making a climate of friendliness, of fun, of faith, of Christian values. So I think what you want is, yes, of course, a Christian family, but what a wholesome involves so much more. Wholesome involves the values you pass on, the atmosphere you radiate outside. What you really want, and I remember when my wife and I got married, we wrote a prayer for that marriage, and we prayed that prayer after our after we joined our rings. Not we didn't join our rings. Anyway, after we got married, we both read that prayer together, and I remember that it contained the phrase, "Lord, give that our house becomes a place where people can find shelter and experience happiness." I think that's what I mean with wholesome. What I want you to become if you found a family is a place where people go and say, ooh, I want that too. There is something in that house, in that family, in the way these people treat each other that I also want to have in my life. That's what I mean with wholesome.
A family should have core values, and that, I guess that goes with what you say about the 5 things you should consider. But you should really, I guess, establish those core values before the wedding, before the marriage, before the children come along, and then see those core values through your time as a family. Would that be correct? Am I interpreting that correctly?
I don't really think that's possible because before you have children, you won't know how to pass on all the things that are important to you. Mm-hmm. And you also have to find out for a while, what are we together? You can't clarify everything beforehand. Right. There is a bit of learning involved. So I would say that one very core element of a wholesome family is exactly what I say, the large number of children. Mm-hmm. If you're open to a large number of children, then all of these children will learn all the core values around the dinner table. They will learn, for instance, that each one of them is not the center of the universe, that they have to share with other people from their earliest childhood on, that they're not entitled to one iMac, one iPad, two phones, and the latest gym shoes, but that you have to pass on things to your siblings. You learn in a numerous family. You learn to look out for the weaker. You also learn what an incredibly strong bond numerous family is. And you will be sure of yourself. You won't fall that easily. You will know that your siblings will have your back whenever you're in trouble. A very practical situation that I notice is when my children go together to a party or a ball or a feast or something, and they come in a group, you just know I won't be alone. I'm not going to hang somewhere like a wallflower in the corner and nobody will talk to me because my family is here. My siblings are here. I'm not alone. So you're right. One has to clarify a few central points about your ideas of family, but the way to pass on the values and keep them alive is something you also learn by surviving the impact of your first children arriving and by surviving the impact of the second child arriving and to make ends meet. So it's a mixture. It's a mixture, in my opinion.
You know, we have the problem here in the United States, and I imagine it's the same in Europe, where families raise their children in the Catholic faith, but once they get to a certain age, maybe they go off to college, or they fall away from the faith. How can we raise our children to be faithful Catholics throughout their lives?
Well, I think it's all about learning by doing and learning by example. My father has a very good line that he always repeated to us as children. Children won't do what their parents say, they will do what their parents do. If your children see that you grab the rosary when there is a crisis and not yell around or curse, when they see that faith is really important to dad and to mom, and when they see that faith is an integral element in the family life, that there are icons in the corner, that the times of the year are important in your faith life, all of that, then your children have quite a good basis to face life. The problem is, of course, that if you put them in school, no, not if, when you put them in school, you might be in a climate that will bring your children away from all those values. And while 30 years ago, you could still be more or less sure that state, church, and school more or less stood for the same values, now you put them into a very different climate. And it's a climate in that I would really seriously think about the possibility of homeschooling, if that's possible in your part of the world, because that enables you to give your children a more harmonious kind of teaching for a longer time, or find a good Catholic school if there is one in your area. Because you're absolutely right. The experience in the church often is that children stay there until First Communion, then they pop up once more at confirmation, and then they're gone, and you never see them again. And but I think that if you really find the time to bring your children closer to the sacraments, to Holy Mass, confession, and if you bring them together with friends that share the faith, and their children share the faith too, then you have quite a good chance that the next generation will marry someone who has the same faith. And that's the basis for how the church will grow strong again, in my impression.
And pray, pray, pray. Right.
Absolutely, absolutely. It's the rosary. It's the rosary. Pray and be an example to your children, but mostly pray. I think we live in a time where it's especially important that fathers pray. The children have to know that you have a rosary in your pocket. Even if you don't use it every day, it's good to have it in the pocket because you might use it more often if you have it in your pocket than if you don't. I mean, you still have 10 fingers, so you can pray a rosary, but a rosary in your pocket makes a difference. And be an example for your children and pray for them. Pray for your children every day. Oh, yes, and one last very important hint. Teach your children from childhood on, every day in their evening prayer, pray for your future spouse. When I got engaged to my wife, we both found out that we had been doing this all our lives. And I think it's part of the reason why, thank God, we had a very wonderful marriage.
As a member of one of the great Catholic families of Western civilization, what additional lessons do you want your readers to take away from the book and from the history of your family?
Yes, there is a subtitle to this book, which is Habsburg Lessons, I think.
Yes, from the centuries.
Habsburg Lessons from the Centuries. And the book is peppered with examples from my family history, because the Habsburgs were, among all the aristocratic families of Europe, the family that's a Catholic family with lots of children. That's why I've put examples all over my book that can be encouraging. And I have to say, one story that in my first book, I think most people remember the story about Marie Antoinette's death. Mm-hmm. In this book, the story I want you to take home is the beautiful story of one of the most unlikely examples as a father in faith, and that's the husband of Empress Maria Theresia, Francis of Lorraine. He was the only Freemason we ever had in the family. Mm. And because he became a Freemason before he got to know her. And not exactly what you would imagine an exemplary Catholic father to be, but he really held on tight to confession. Mm. And he spent his years telling his children, go to confession regularly, go to communion, but before that, go to confession. And in the end, when he died totally unexpected. He died after he visited the theater. He felt unwell, and a very short time later, he was dead. In the eyes of the Catholic Church, he had no time to prepare for death. But because he faithfully, every Sunday, went to confession and then to communion, he died with the sacraments because it was a Sunday when he died. And I think this was God saying thank you to him for his faithfulness. And Maria Theresia repeated this story to all of her children. And all of her children had learned this lesson. Confession is important. And you can be a good example, even if you're not an exemplary Catholic, like Francis of Lorraine.
Ambassador Habsburg, thanks so much for being with us today. The book is titled Building a Wholesome Family in a Broken World, Habsburg Lessons from the Centuries. It's available from Sophia Institute Press. And hopefully you'll come back, Mr. Ambassador, when your next book is out.
Oh boy, I've just finished one. Give me a few months. Okay. Thank you very much.
My pleasure. Nice seeing you. God bless.